Hello friends, welcome to CEC live lectures. Dear friends, today in computer science we will discuss about computer security threats. In the first half of the lecture we will discuss about malicious software as well as network security threats. To discuss this topic we have with us our subject expert Dr. Pavitra Bharadwaj. Dr. Bharadwaj is assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science in Jesus and Mary College, University of Delhi. Without further ado, I would like to welcome ma'am to our studios and request her to start the lecture. Welcome ma'am.
Good afternoon. Today we are going to talk about a topic in information security, that is threats. As we had discussed in the previous few lectures, that information is one of the most vital assets of an organization. That is, information is important not just for the organization's business but also for its overall business processes, its reputation, and how the market looks at the organization from the information point of view. Therefore, information security is one of the very important domains in computer science. We understand that security of information has evolved over a number of times, and therefore we have seen that earlier the information was in the physical form, where it was used for it was secured using physical attributes like closets and locks and keys. But as time progressed, information has changed its form from physical form to a more digital kind of information, and therefore in that sense now the rules of information security and protection have also changed. So we will see that information security can be, there are different requirements for information security, and these information security requirements have evolved with the change in the perspectives, the change in the way information is stored, the networks which access the information. Now people access information resources over internet and over mobile devices. So therefore the requirements of security and securing your data and information has changed. So information security not just talks about the security of the information, but this is a domain which will talk about the security of information systems as well. So when we are talking about information systems, we will mean the securing the people, the hardware, the software, the data and the programs which are stored and which process that data. So traditionally we had provided physical and administrative mechanisms, but now networks and communication links are required to protect data during transmission. So now we come to the definition of computer security. So it is the protection afforded to an automated information system in order to attain applicable objectives of preserving the integrity, availability and confidentiality of information resources. So I would like to show you here that the security requirements for data and services, they have three objectives. So this is known as the security triad, which means we have three objectives, that is confidentiality, availability and integrity of data as well as services. Now we must understand that these three objectives, they are very difficult to achieve at the same time. See, integrity of data means that the data should be always in its correct form, that is the quality of the data should be maintained at any given point of time, the quality of services should be what it is expected to be, and the data should be correct and consistent at any given point of time. By confidentiality we mean that the data should only be available to the authorized people and it should not be available on a platform where it is not secure or to the unintended user. Even by mistake, the data should not be shared with any people who are not supposed to know that data. And availability basically refers to the concept of making the data and the services available to any person or any service who is asking for the data. That is, the security constraints should not be imposed in a way that the rightful or the legal people and services, they are denied of the data or services because of our security. So basically these are three diverse objectives of the information security requirements, which means we need to keep the data correct, we need to keep it confidential. At the same time, it should always be maintained and it should always be kept available, made available to the rightful people. Now besides these two objectives, there are two other objectives or additional criteria which are added. These are accountability. Accountability means that if I have started a procedure, or if I am using a data, or if I am using a system, I should be accountable to the system and there should be non-repudiation. That is, I should take the ownership of any changes that I am making to the system, or I should, if I am passing on a document, then there should be mechanism of ascertaining that who is the owner or who is the person who has sent this document or who has sent this particular form or who has initiated a particular process or triggered some network activity, and the person cannot deny it. So this can be done using various methods like digital signature, etc. So that will ensure that a person cannot deny his actions or his interactions with the data. The next is authenticity. Authenticity means that the data or the information which the system is giving should be genuine, it should be authentic, and it should be correct and verifiable at any point of time. So therefore we say that information security objectives are not just integrity, availability, confidentiality, but also we add the two A's of authenticity and accountability to it. So basically what we are trying to aim is to create an information system which will fulfill all these 5 different types of objectives. So before we actually come to the topic of threats and we start discussing what are the various factors which may pose a threat to an information system, we will first have a look at some important terminologies that we are going to use in the course of this lecture. So the first the important concept that we must understand is a threat. So basically what is a threat? It is a potential cause of an accident that may result in harm to a system or organization. Vulnerability means a weakness of an asset or resource or a group of assets that can be exploited by one or more threats. Risk is the potential for loss, damage or destruction of an asset as a result of threat exploiting a vulnerability. And threat agent are the entities that would knowingly seek to manifest a threat. So basically what we are saying is that threat is the potential cause, the agent which may cause harm to the system. So let us take an example of a weak password. If we have a system in which the password is weak, so this weak password is actually a vulnerability of the system because it can be exploited by any kind of agent, any kind of person or system or service which can easily get into the system. So the weak password is a vulnerability and the threat is the people or any kind of service who may exploit this vulnerability to cause the harm, and the harm which is caused, which is going to be the data or the system's resources which are at risk because of the weak password, come under the purview of the risk. Therefore we have a relationship between vulnerability, risk and threat. So if you find out the product of the vulnerability and the risk, you get the threat. So now different types of people or different types of individuals are involved in different kinds of illegal or we can say criminal activities related to computers or information systems. So there are different categories, we can say that categories of people who may cause a harm to the computer system. So the first in this category of people are the amateurs. Now amateurs are basically students, or they are teenage people who are basically, they may be disgruntled employee, and what they are doing is they are just causing time stealing. That is, they are using the resources which they have been provided by their employer, by the organization, instead of, and they are using it for their personal benefit. They are maybe they are doing their own banking activities like this. So basically they are simple people who have sometimes who don't even intend to harm or bring any loss to the company, but they are using the resources which have been provided to them for their personal benefit. Then the next kind of people are the crackers. Now crackers are basically teenagers and college and school young students who are doing this as an intellectual challenge, for curiosity, for personal gain, and sometimes just for enjoyment. So these are simple people, and they generally they do not have any malicious intention of harming the system. Just they get an access to the system and they start playing around with it, and during that course they may get into the confidential information, or they may just happen to accidentally fall into it. Then the third category of people are the career criminals. Now the career criminals are actually, these are professionals. They have a very vast and they have a good knowledge of how the system is working, and they use it, the vulnerabilities of the system, they use them for their competitive advantage, for the rivals. These could be computer trained people who have knowledge of various programming languages, operating systems, networking protocols, and they use all this language to create softwares which can be used. And the fourth and the most dangerous category of computer criminals are the terrorists. Nowadays this has come as a common activity that terrorists are planning targeted attacks on websites. They are using some websites as propaganda vehicles to gain solidarity and to gain some publicity out of the information technology aids, and they are using social media, etc., and they are spreading different kinds of illegal network through the use of information technology. So basically cyber terrorists are the highest and the most dangerous type of criminals which are involved and which are using and exploiting information technology for very, very dangerous output. Then these could be now they could cause different types of damages to the computer system, but we classify these damages to the computer system into 4 main classes. So first is interruption. Interruption means that the process or the person is just trying to interrupt an ongoing smooth process, and they are trying to just stop that process in between and cause a harm. The next could be interception. So interception means that this is basically related to any unauthorized party snooping or getting access to a resource. Then modification means that unauthorized party is modifying a resource, a data item or anything. And fabrication means any unauthorized party inserts a fake asset or resource. So these 4 different types of damages can be caused by the people that we had just discussed: interruption, interception, modification, and fabrication. Now different types of threat agents are there. Like we can have some natural threat agents which are like fire, floods, power failure, earthquakes, etc. Then there could be an unintentional, just like we were talking about the amateurs who are insiders or maybe outsiders. They are primarily non-hostile and accidentally they may cause some damage. And then there are intentional threats and people who are doing it with hostile intentions, and sometimes they are just doing it out of curiosity. So we have different types of people in this. We have hackers and crackers, etc. So we are going to discuss about all these in the course of this lecture. Then basically threat is any person or object or any entity that represents a constant danger to an asset. So management must be informed of the different threats facing the organization, and therefore overall security of the organization should be improved. So basically we are looking at a system which is surrounded by a large number of threats, large number and different types of threats, ranging from natural calamities, and maybe we can say them as acts of God or misfortunes, to some kind of unintentional activities and some kind of other intentional dangerous activities which are intended for causing harm to the system. So basically we can look at this chart and we can see that different threats to the information security may be compromise to intellectual property. Then we can have software attacks, where we will talk about the different types of malicious softwares which are there, like viruses, worms, etc. Then we have deviations in quality of service, then espionage or trespass, then forces of nature like fire, flood, earthquake, lightning, etc. Then some human error, then information extortion, missing, inadequate or incomplete information due to the lack of access to information systems. Then we will also look at sabotage and vandalism, theft, technical hardware failure and technical software failure, and besides this also technological obsolescence. So in the course of this lecture we are going to look at each of these threats individually. So the first type of threat that we are going to talk about is compromise to intellectual property. So intellectual property basically refers to the ownership of ideas and control over the tangible or virtual representation of those ideas. So the most common intellectual property breaches involved software piracy. Enforcement of copyright laws has been attempted with technical security mechanism. So basically a large number of companies, during the operations of their business, they tend to generate some intellectual property. They tend to create some softwares which are unique in their own right, and which do they create some kind of technological innovations which they would want to protect. But these breaches are there, and these some of the other people, whether insider or outsider, may be trying to compromise with that, and they may be trying to steal those intellectual property, and they are using their the software ideas for their own gain without taking the due permissions. So therefore for this, the enforcement of laws has to be attempted and security mechanisms have to be set in place. Now the next category of threats are malicious softwares. Now malicious softwares, we have heard a large number of names like viruses and Trojan horses, worms, etc. But here we are going to study them more systematically. So malicious software is any software which runs on the system with an intention of causing harm to the system. So these are basically, they can be categorized into two categories. One are those softwares which need some kind of host program to run on, and the other are independent. So the independent malicious programs includes worms and zombies, and those that need a host program are trapdoor, logic bombs, Trojan horses and viruses. So malicious software, they damage, destroy or deny a service to any kind of target system. So the first in this category of software that we are going to discuss is the trapdoor. So the backdoor or trapdoor is an secret entry point into a program. It allows those who know access bypassing usual security procedures. They have been commonly used by developers. A threat when left in production programs, allowing to be exploited by the attackers. It is very hard to block in the operating system, and it requires good software development and update. So basically sometimes what happens is that software developers, when they are creating the software, sometimes with honest or sometimes with dishonest intentions, they leave some kind of entry points in their software. So because of those entry points, some other software can enter and it can create undesirable results, it can give undesirable results. So therefore these softwares are known as backdoor, because they enter into the system through vulnerabilities which are being left for during the process of software development. The next category is the logic bomb. Now the logic bomb is one of the oldest types of malicious software. There is, in this case, the code is embedded in a legitimate program and it is activated when specified conditions are met. For example, on a particular date or a particular user or presence or absence of some file, and when it is triggered, it typically damages the system, like modifies, delete or halts the machine, etc. So basically logic bomb, you can compare it to a bomb which has been triggered and which will explode only at a given specific point of time. So logic bombs are not copied from one system to the other, but they are actually a part of a legitimate program only. For instance, we can say that there is a particular employee who is disgruntled and who is set to leave the organization. Now he can set a trigger inside the system that the system will come to a crash on a specific date, and by then the employee must have left the organization. So this bomb will keep ticking, and on that particular date, when that condition is met, then it will simply explode and this logic bomb will get the system crashing down. So in this case, logic bombs are very difficult, because they cannot be detected unless the point or the condition has been met where these logic bombs will be exploded or where the damage will be done. The next category of malicious softwares are Trojan horses. Now Trojan horse basically is a program which appears to be something else, but actually it will have some hidden side effects. So with these programs, they are superficially attractive, like they will look like a software update, or they will look like a game, or they will look like some other kind of very lucrative offer from any kind of consumer company. But actually when the user will install these programs in the system, they will not do what they had proposed to do, but in fact they are going to harm the system and they are going to destroy or damage or delete the files. They may be deceptive, and they provide indirect access to the user who can to the person who has given these Trojan horses or who has launched these programs. So basically Trojan horses were used by the Greeks in the historic times in the wars, and they put their soldiers in them, and then they just moved the horse in the capital, and then soldiers came out. So this idea or this term has been coined from that point in history, where these programs, these deceptive programs are used, and these programs then cause damage, although they look something else and they do something else. So they simply destroy the data within the program. The next type of malicious software are the mobile codes. Now these are actually programs, scripts or macros that runs unchanged on heterogeneous collection of platforms or on large homogeneous collections like the operating system or the Windows. So these are transmitted from remote system to the local system, and then these are executed on the local system. So they inject viruses, worms or Trojan horses into the system or perform their own exploits. So basically unauthorized data access or root compromises are done by these mobile code. So mobile code word has been used because these are softwares or these are programs which get installed in the computer from some remote computer. So when you are actually downloading some file from a remote computer, then you may also download this kind of mobile code into the computer. Sometimes we see that macros are there. Macros are programs which will execute on their own. Once it is started, then it keeps on executing a number of steps on its own. So these macros, they can be used, they are used in a large number of fair and honest programs also, but the same can be done, the same mechanism of a macro can be used with a malicious intention also using the mobile code. So now we have different types of multi-threat malware are there. So malware could be they could be multipartite malware or they could be blended malware. So multipartite malware are basically those who are intend to harm multiple types of files at the same time, whereas blended malware attacks are very dangerous attacks, because they will not just use any one kind of malicious software, but they work in combination. So there will be a virus, a worm and a trojan all hidden within the same attack. So such kind of a blended attack is very difficult to detect, and also it is very difficult to recover a system from this kind of blended attack. So we shall be continuing with viruses and worms after a short break. Thank you.
Dear friends, in this lecture on computer security threats, we have done malicious software threats. On that note, we are going to take a break, and after the break, we will be continuing with the lecture. Thank you for watching. Hello friends, welcome to CEC live lectures. Dear friends, in this lecture on computer security threats, so far we have discussed about malicious software. In this part of the lecture, we will talk about network security threats and as well as malicious software as well. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Dr. Pavitra Bharadwaj. And let's welcome Dr. Bharadwaj and ask her to resume the lecture. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. So we were talking about malicious softwares. So in that line, now we will continue with viruses. So virus is a very common term which we hear in our everyday dialogue, and every second computer that we see, we get to know that, oh, this is infected or this is affected by some kind of virus. So basically, what is a computer virus? So computer virus is any kind of program which is self-replicating. Like we have viruses that affect human beings, that get transmitted from one person to the other. Similarly, computer viruses also, they have a tendency of being of a nature of being transmitted from one computer to the other. And these viruses, they are specific to a particular program, or they are specific to a particular hardware or software, and sometimes there are viruses which are uniquely designed to affect a particular or a specific combination of hardware and software. So basically, virus is a piece of software that infects programs. It modifies them to include a copy of the virus. It executes secretly when the host program is run. So it is specific to operating systems and hardwares. It takes advantage of their details and weaknesses. So a typical virus, it goes through 4 phases. First is dormant, second is propagation, the third is triggering, and the fourth is the execution phase. So all viruses, they have basically these 4 phases: dormant, propagation, triggering and execution phase. So in case the virus structure, if we talk about, so a virus has 3 main parts. First is the infection mechanism, the part, then we have the trigger or the event that makes the payload activate, and the payload is what it does, that is the malicious, or whether it is malicious or it is benign, and the loss that the virus is going to bring to the system. And viruses can be prepended, they can be postpended and embedded. So when infected program is invoked, it executes the virus code and then the original program code. It can block the initial infection, which is a difficult thing, or propagation with access controls. So basically, computer viruses, they have 4 phases in their life cycle. The first phase, which is called as the dormant phase, in which the virus is not in a very active stage. This is not considered very commonly for most of the computer viruses. The second phase is the propagation phase. In case of the propagation phase, what happens is that the computer virus will copy itself from one program to the other. It will create more and more copies of itself within the program, within the system, or it will also try to move to the other system. And in case, then the next stage in the life cycle of the virus is trigger. So in case of trigger, the virus will trigger the activity. There will be a particular event that will trigger the virus to start execution, and then the virus starts execution in its execution phase, and then execution is the time where the virus is going to create the damage, if it is intended to create any kind of damage to the system or to the programs. Now viruses can cause the different kinds of damages to the programs, from simply deleting some files, deleting some codes of some lines of code from a particular file, trying to alter the behavior of a program. Or some of the viruses, they actually don't do anything, they are very benign viruses. They may lie in the dormant stage for long durations of time without the user even getting to know that there is a virus infection inside. But the viruses, it's very difficult to control the viruses, particularly in the stage when it is propagating. Once it has propagated, once it is in your system, then there are another kind of programs which will help in detecting the existence of any kinds of viruses in the system. So control and controlling the execution of a virus in the system is very, very difficult, although we can control how the virus, the triggering events can be controlled, which will trigger the execution or the particular scenario in which the virus is going to create the damage to a particular computer or a particular file. The next category of malicious softwares are of those softwares which can exist independently. They do not require another kind of host program for their existence. So in this category, we will be talking about 2 programs. One are the worms and the second are the zombies or bots. So in case of worms are again very similar to viruses, because they also have the same kind of life cycle. The 4 stages in the life cycle of the worm are the same, that is they have a dormant, then a propagation, then a triggering and an execution phase. And the damage also which the worms cause, the kind of activity that the worms cause is also similar to that of virus. The main difference is that a worm can execute or can remain in the network, and it can transmit itself from one computer to the other computer through the computer network. It may not require a program on which it will be hidden. So, it is a replicating program, basically it is a self-replicating program which goes into the computer and causes different kinds of damages. So, it may also sometimes disguise itself in the form of a system process. That is, it will take the name of a file, of a system file, or it may take the name of an important process, so that it will be able to hide itself from the eyes of the programmer or from the eyes of the administrator, because they may assume that this is a normal program file of the computer, whereas it is actually a worm file of the system. Then the next category of malicious softwares are known as zombie. These are also sometimes known as drones. So, these programs, they secretly act inside, they take another internet attached computer and then they transmit over the network from one system to the other, and then they cause extreme kind of damage. So, zombies, they may be transmitted in sets together, and those sets or those multiple zombies that transmit from one computer to the other computer over the internet, they are known as a blot slot. Now, this is about malicious softwares. Now, we are going to talk about another kind of threat, that is deviation in the quality of service. So, this includes situations where products or services are not delivered as expected. So, information systems depends on many interdependent support systems. Internet service, communications and power irregularities dramatically affect the availability of information and systems. So, basically the service which a system is providing or which a product is providing is dependent not just on the product itself, but also on a large number of support services which are provided. For example, the most important service which is required to provide a good quality service in case of websites or in case of portals which are working on a cloud based platform is the internet connectivity. In case the internet connectivity is not appropriate, or the speed or the bandwidth which has been provided by the internet service provider is not up to the mark, then in that case the overall services provided by the portal or provided by the e-commerce company will come down. So, therefore, that will be a lack of service on the part of the internet service provider, which is actually affecting the quality of service which is provided by this particular company or this particular organization. Then an important consideration in case of developing and underdeveloped countries may be a power. The power supply, computers are all electronic devices and power supply to these must be maintained. Now, there could be different scenarios or different kinds of faults which can occur when power is supplied to the devices, like there could be a surge or there could be a slag. So, in case of surge or slag, in case of surge the voltage which is supplied is very high, spike in voltage is there. In case of slag, the voltage which is supplied is very less. So, in that case there are shortages or there are losses in the volt fluctuations may take place. So, because of this also a large amount of damage can be done, particularly in case of networking equipment. Networking equipment is very sensitive to the amount of voltage, amount of power that they get, and if there is no control or no regulation on the voltage or power supply, then this may cause an extreme damage to the devices which are used. Then other channels also, like communication channels also, sometimes they play a very important role in case of providing the desirable quality of service which is expected from a particular system or from a particular set of services. So, those may also be affected when this kind of deviation in the quality of service happens. The next kind of threat that we are going to talk about is of trespass or espionage. Now, a very common phenomenon that is known as shoulder surfing. Shoulder surfing is something like if we are trying to put the pin in the ATM. So then at that time somebody may be looking at it intentionally or unintentionally and may get to know the pin, or this may happen in case of telephones, or this may happen in case of passwords. So then these people, they get to know some confidential information which they must not be knowing, but because of this they may be getting access to some kind of vital and sensitive data or information which belongs to an individual or a institution or an organization. So in this case this may be caused as an espionage, and if it happens in a large scale industrial setup, then it is called as an industrial espionage, which is a big cyber crime, which is a big illegal activity also. If it is only in unintentional, and then it may be known as a trespass. So competitive intelligence, which is a legal thing, where therefore, and however there could be industrial espionage, which is an illegal form of trespassing into others' information. So there are people called hackers who use their skill, and even fraud to bypass controls and protect others' information. So in this case we can see how a trespassing of ATM information is taking place. So now in this case, in espionage or trespass, there are different kinds of people who may be involved. So there could be an expert hacker who develops the software skills, scripts, writes programs and exploits. He is actually a master of many skills, and he often creates attacks and shares it with others. And then we have the unskilled hacker who has these are much larger in numbers than the expert hackers, and they use the programs which are written by the expert hackers. So they do not fully understand the systems that they hack, but they will utilize the knowledge of the expert hacker in causing damage to the system, or in getting into the system and looking at the confidential information or causing damage to the system. So an expert hacker is actually a person who has tried a lot of programming and now is bored, and sometimes they do it with malicious intentions towards their employers. So these are people who have a large knowledge base. They use programming languages, networking protocols, and they use all kind of operating system knowledge, and they understand the vulnerabilities of systems, and then they write codes or software scripts which will exploit these vulnerabilities of the computer system. Besides this, there are other terms also, like the crackers, who removes the software protection design to prevent unauthorized duplication, and there are phreakers who hack the public telephone network. So these are other kinds of trespassers who get into the information systems. Now besides this, there are also forces of nature which may cause a large amount of damage in terms of money, and also sometimes in terms of human life to the information system. So these may include the effects of lightning, maybe earthquake or floods, or different kinds of natural disasters. And for this, actually the companies, they need to have some contingency plan, and to limit the damage which is occurring because of these natural disasters which are happening. Fire, flood, water, etc. all these come under the purview of natural disasters or natural threats to the information system. So the companies, they have the different kinds of insurance policies, they have different kinds of mechanisms to secure the value of their assets from all this kind of natural disasters. Then we also have another threat, that is human error or failure. Sometimes we see that the employees of the company, because they are the most important resource of the company, and also they are the most important threat posed to the resources or to the assets of the company, because they are insiders, they have all the knowledge which is required to bring harm to the system. So a disgruntled employee may become the worst possible threat than any of the other threats that we have discussed. But sometimes errors also occur, and because of those human errors, there are possibilities of the system failing, or different kinds and different extents of damage which can be caused to an information system. So these may be because of inexperience, or because of improper training, or some incorrect assumptions. So the employees, they become the greatest threat to the organization's data. So these are basically, we are talking about those threats which are with non-malicious intent. So an employee may assume something and he may delete a particular file, and because of that some kind of damage may occur. Or sometimes we see that employees, they spill something on the hardware, and or they use incorrect kind of scenarios, and therefore there are mechanisms in the companies or in the systems which will prevent such errors to happen. Like these could be from simple mechanisms to confirming the act before actually executing it. So they confirm, the system itself will confirm it twice, or sometimes they may be very complicated, like typing the command and also verifying it by or escalating the same action to the other higher authority, so that even accidentally the particular employee may not commit a mistake and harm the system. So because of this, sometimes the human error, the employee may reveal some classified data, entry erroneous data, or data deletion and modification. Employee may store it in an unprotected area, or he may fail to protect the information. So all these kinds of threats, they can be easily controlled with appropriate measures which can be taken at the higher management level. Now the next type of threat is information extortion. Now information extortion is basically done by an insider, a person who knows a lot about the system, who has gained access and who owns some kind of very important critical information assets of the company, and then he may start blackmailing the management of the company and extort money or some kind of other gains in order to give back the information or give back the rights of that information back to the legal owners of the company. So this is generally, we can see this happens in case of credit card numbers thefts, and some kind of insider activity is involved in this activity. Then we have missing, inadequate or incomplete policy. So in policy or planning can make organizations vulnerable to loss, damage or disclosure of information assets. With control, we can make an organization more likely to suffer losses when other threats lead to attacks. So the policies of the company are also an important factor in controlling the amount of threats that are posed to a particular information system. The next type of threat is sabotage or vandalism. So these threats can range from petty vandalism to organized sabotage. So websites defacing can erode the consumer's confidence, dropping sales and organizations' net worth. Threat of hacktivist and cyber activist operations are rising, and cyber terrorism, which is much more sinister form of hacking. So sabotage basically means causing any kind of physical or logical damage to the assets of an organization. Now a new term has come which is called the hacktivist or the cyber activist. So these are peoples who will utilize the platform of the World Wide Web or the websites to propagate wrongful messages among the people, or sometimes they may try to create a sense of insecurity among the people using the use of the information technology. Then there is also many forms of cyber terrorism. So we understand that basically the face of an organization in the logical world is the website. So if the website of a company or of an organization is hacked, or it gets into the control, it is defaced, or it is vandalized by some kind of criminal minded people, then the reputation of the company may come down, and this may not only lead to present loss but also a large amount of loss of business for that particular company in the future times to come. Therefore, sabotage and vandalism is one very important destructor in the image of various companies that have been affected by this kind of mechanism. Then of course we have a very common kind of threat, that is theft. So theft basically means robbing or owning somebody's assets without the permission. So it is illegal of taking of another's property or another's assets without their permission or without getting the rightful licenses or without paying the dues for that company. So software piracy is another form of theft or another form of which can be controlled. So physical theft can be controlled relatively easily, whereas electronic theft is more complex. So because the evidence of the crime are not readily apparent. So illegal activity like intellectual property theft, physical theft or any kind of electronic or data theft is a big challenge which may be posed more than the physical theft of assets. Then we have technical hardware failures or errors. So these occur when manufacturer distributes equipment containing flaws to users. So these can cause system to perform outside of expected parameters, resulting in unreliable or poor services. Some errors are terminal, whereas some errors are intermittent. So the hardware which has been supplied by the organization or by the company, sometimes people will pay for it, but still they will not get the right kind of product or the right functioning product. Because of this also there is a lot of harm which comes to the company or which comes to the user. So this is another threat, that the products which are supplied to the consumers, they may not be of the appropriate or of the right quality. Next, similarly we have the threats or we have problems with the softwares also. So there could be technical problems with the softwares or errors also. We understand that softwares are also all created by human beings, and therefore they are prone to many kinds of errors. Some of these errors are intentional also. Sometimes the software programmers, they leave certain loopholes in their programs which can later be used to exploit the company's management for their own gain, but sometimes the software programmers leave certain things unintentionally. Like for example, we see that there is a problem of, there was a common example of data being truncated. So in this case, a software programmer utilized this concept of truncation of values, and he truncated that small amounts of which appeared in paise and transmitted those paise into his own account. So because of this, the bank had to lose a large amount of money, but this was actually a small technical error which was developed intentionally, of course, by the software programmer who was working on it. So there are certain combinations of softwares and hardware also which reveal certain new kind of software bugs. The purchase softwares, they contain certain unrevealed faults which are difficult to track. The entire websites, they are dedicated to documenting bugs and to see how these errors can be seen. The last kind of threat that we are going to talk about today is the technological obsolescence. So obsolescence is actually a problem in lesser developed or in not so robust organizations, where software and hardware which are not up to the mark or which are not latest, which have been obsolete, are still getting into use. So these obsolete software and hardware may cause some kind of different kinds of problems and bring different kinds of losses. Some of these softwares, they are not supported by a particular version of the hardware. So they will require a particular configuration of hardware of the system. So they may not work appropriately and they may not give the correct and the desired results in case of obsolete hardware being utilized there. So, we have seen in today's lecture the different kinds of threats which are posed to an information system, from natural to human to technological threats. So, thank you. We will be continuing in the next lecture.
Dear friends, in this lecture on computer security threats, we have discussed about malicious software as well as network security threats. On that note, we are going to wind up our lecture here, and would like to thank Dr. Bharadwaj for coming here and delivering this wonderful lecture. And thank you, dear friends, watching our lecture. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.